I found the ballot stuffed behind the recycling bin at 3 in the morning, and that single piece of paper would eventually bring down the most corrupt HOA board Riverside County, California had ever seen. My name is Marcus Chen, and I moved into the Sunset Vista Estates community in Temecula 2 years ago with my wife Jennifer and our 8-year-old daughter Emma. The development was beautiful, with palm-lined streets, manicured lawns, and a community center that looked like something out of a resort brochure. What I didn't know when I signed the mortgage papers was that I was moving into what would become a war zone, with battle lines drawn between reasonable homeowners and a tyrannical HOA board led by a woman whose very name still makes my blood pressure spike, Sharon Kensington. Even typing her name feels like inviting bad karma into my life. Sharon was the HOA president, a 52-year-old woman with aggressively highlighted blonde hair always styled in that, "I want to speak to the manager," bob cut. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a custom license plate that read SHRNK1 and wore velour tracksuits in various pastel colors like it was still 2003. But her fashion crimes were nothing compared to the actual crimes she would eventually commit. The problem started small. Jennifer got a violation notice for having our trash cans visible from the street at 4:30 in the afternoon on a non-collection day. The notice included a grainy photo time-stamped at 4:27 p.m., showing our green bins sitting at the end of our driveway. Never mind that trash collection happened at 6 a.m., and we both worked full-time jobs that made it impossible to sprint home and hide our garbage cans the moment the truck drove away. I called the HOA office, a small building near the community center that Sharon ran like her personal fiefdom. Her assistant, a nervous 20-something named Patricia, answered. "Sunset Vista HOA, how may I help you?" "Hi, this is Marcus Chen at 847 Oleander Drive. I received a violation notice about my trash cans, but they were only out because we both work until 5. The rules say cans need to be stored by end of day, which I interpret as evening, not mid-afternoon." Patricia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I understand, Mr. Chen, but Mrs. Kensington is very strict about the definitions. She considers end of day to be 4 p.m. That's not what the CC and Articus say. I read them. End of day means end of day, not an arbitrary time she decides. I can submit your appeal to the board, but I should warn you that Mrs. Kensington personally reviews all appeals and she rarely changes her decisions." That first violation cost me $50. I paid it, annoyed but not yet alarmed. That was my mistake. I should have fought it from the beginning, should have recognized the warning signs. Instead, I convinced myself it was easier to just be more careful about the trash cans. The violations kept coming. Our front door wreath was the wrong shade of seasonal colors. Our mailbox showed signs of weathering and needed immediate repainting, even though it had been painted 6 months earlier. Jennifer planted roses in our front yard, only to receive a violation because they were coral-colored instead of the approved red or pink varieties. Each violation came with a fine, each fine a little larger than the last. Other neighbors were suffering too. My friend Tom Rodriguez, who lived 3 houses down, got cited because his lawn was allegedly a 1/4 inch too long. The Patels across the street received a violation for their daughter's chalk drawings on their own driveway, classified as unapproved decorative modifications. Mrs. Hoffman, a sweet elderly widow next door, was fined $200 because a FedEx driver left a package visible on her porch for 3 hours while she was at her doctor's appointment. We started talking, those of us who were being targeted. It became clear that Sharon had her favorites, homes that never seemed to receive violations no matter how egregious their actual infractions. Her best friend Donna Pritchard had a boat parked in her driveway for 3 weeks, clearly visible, clearly against the rules. Nothing. Brad Summers, who owned a construction company and did free work on Sharon's house, had built an unpermitted gazebo in his backyard. Not a single violation notice. The breaking point came in September, 4 months before the discovery that would change everything. Sharon announced at a board meeting that she was proposing a special assessment of $1,500 per household to repave the community center parking lot and upgrade the pool facilities. $1,500 per household in a community of 240 homes meant $360,000. I attended that meeting, held in the community center's main room. About 40 other homeowners showed up, which was actually a good turnout. Most people were too busy or too intimidated to attend these meetings, which was exactly how Sharon liked it. She stood at the front of the room with her board members flanking her like royal courtiers. There was Donald Mercier, the vice president, a retired insurance executive who seemed to agree with everything Sharon said. Karen Whitmore, the treasurer, was a thin woman with pursed lips who dressed like she was attending a funeral every single day. And finally, Blake Morrison, the secretary, a balding man in his 40s who spent most meetings staring at his phone. "The parking lot is a disgrace," Sharon announced, clicking through PowerPoint slides that showed various cracks and imperfections in the asphalt. "And the pool furniture is 7 years old. 7 years. We need to maintain property values, and that means investing in our common areas." A man I didn't recognize raised his hand. "Did you get multiple bids for this work?" Sharon's smile tightened. "We received a very competitive bid from Apex Construction." "Brad Summers' company," someone muttered behind me. "How much of that $360,000 is for the parking lot versus the pool furniture?" I asked, standing up so she could see who was speaking. Sharon's eyes locked onto mine with the intensity of a predator spotting prey. "The breakdown is in the proposal, which is available for review at the HOA office during business hours, which are 9 to noon, Monday through Thursday when most of us are at work," Tom Rodriguez called out. "Perhaps if you managed your time better, you could make arrangements to review HOA documents," Sharon replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Now, unless there are any other questions, we'll be voting on this assessment at next month's meeting." "Shouldn't something this expensive require a vote of the full membership?" I pressed. Karen Whitmore leaned toward her microphone. "The CC and Artiques allow the board to approve special assessments up to $2,000 per household without a membership vote. This falls within our authority." The meeting devolved into arguments, with Sharon eventually gaveling everyone into silence and adjourning. As people filed out, small groups formed in the parking lot. That was when Tom approached me. "We need to recall this board," he said quietly. "This is getting out of control." "Is that even possible?" I've been reading the CC and Artiques. "We can call for a special election if we get signatures from 20% of homeowners. That's 48 households. Sharon will fight us every step of the way. Then we fight back." Over the next 3 weeks, Tom, Jennifer, and I spent every evening and weekend knocking on doors. We created a simple petition explaining that we were calling for a special election to recall the current board members and elect new leadership. The response was overwhelming. People were angry, frustrated, scared of Sharon's retaliation, but desperate for change. We got 73 signatures, well over the required threshold. I delivered the petition to the HOA office on a Thursday morning, taking the morning off work specifically for this purpose. Patricia accepted the document with shaking hands. "Mrs. Kensington is not going to be happy about this," she whispered. "That's kind of the point," I replied. Sharon called an emergency board meeting for the following week. The room was packed, standing room only, with angry homeowners filling every available space. Sharon looked like she'd bitten into a lemon, her face pinched and sour. "It has come to our attention that certain residents have submitted a petition for a special election," she began, spitting the words out like they tasted bad. "After careful review with our attorney, the board has determined that the petition is valid. The election will be held in 60 days on December 15th. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sharon banged her gavel repeatedly, her face flushing red. However, she continued, voice rising to be heard over the noise, the board will be implementing strict requirements for candidates. Anyone wishing to run must submit a detailed application, undergo a background check at their own expense, and receive approval from the current board before being placed on the ballot. That's insane, Tom shouted. You can't gatekeep who runs against you. We can and we will, Sharon snapped. This community needs qualified leadership, not any random homeowner who thinks they can do better. The next 60 days were a nightmare of bureaucratic warfare. Tom, myself, and 3 other homeowners submitted applications to run for the board positions. Sharon rejected Tom's application because of a bankruptcy filing from 8 years ago when his previous business failed. She rejected mine because I had been late on HOA dues once, 18 months ago by 3 days, when my bank had a processing error. The other 3 candidates were rejected for equally ridiculous reasons. Sharon's slate of candidates consisted of herself, Donald, Karen, and Blake, plus 1 new person, Donna Pritchard, her best friend with the boat. This is completely rigged, Jennifer said as we sat at our kitchen table reading the rejection letter. What can we do? I don't know yet, but there has to be something. I called the lawyer who had handled our home purchase, explaining the situation. He listened patiently before delivering bad news. HOA law in California is complex. While what they're doing seems unfair, boards do have significant discretion over candidate qualifications. You could sue, but that would take months and cost tens of thousands in legal fees. The election would be long over by then. So we just let her steal it. I didn't say that. Document everything. If you can prove actual fraud or illegality, that's different, but proving unfair isn't the same as proving illegal. The community was furious when the approved candidate list was published. People created social media groups, neighborhood email chains, and even printed flyers calling for write-in votes. California HOA law allowed write-in candidates, and Tom and I both declared our intention to run as write-ins for board positions. Sharon responded by sending out an official HOA newsletter stating that write-in votes would only be counted if the candidate's name was spelled exactly correctly, including middle initials, and that any ballot with corrections, cross-outs, or unclear markings would be discarded as invalid. The election was scheduled for December 15th, with ballots mailed to all homeowners on November 20th. Voting would be conducted by mail, with ballots due back to the HOA office by 5 p.m. on Election Day. Sharon announced that she and Karen Whitmore would personally count the ballots that evening, with results posted within 24 hours. No way, Tom said when he heard this. We need independent ballot counters and we need to be present for the count. We raised this at a pre-election board meeting. Sharon denied the request. The board has always counted ballots. This election will be no different. We are impartial and trustworthy. You're literally running in the election, I pointed out. That's the definition of not impartial. Your objection is noted and overruled. The ballots arrived in late November. They were simple paper ballots with boxes to check next to each candidate's name, plus a blank line for write-ins. The ballot included a return envelope addressed to the HOA office. Here's where things got interesting and where my background became relevant. I didn't mention this before, but I work as a data analyst for a marketing research firm. I spend my days looking for patterns, anomalies, and irregularities in large datasets. I'm naturally suspicious of things that seem too convenient or too perfect. When our ballot arrived, I examined it carefully. The paper was standard white cardstock, nothing fancy. The printing was done on what looked like a basic office laser printer. I held the ballot up to the light, looking at the paper grain and watermark. "Why are you being weird with the ballot?" Jennifer asked, just looking. "You know me, I like to understand how things work." We filled out our ballots, both writing in Thomas Rodriguez and Marcus Chen in careful block letters. I made photocopies before sealing them in the return envelopes. Jennifer raised an eyebrow at this, but I just shrugged. Documentation, I said. Over the next 3 weeks, I talked to as many neighbors as possible about their voting plans. The sentiment was overwhelmingly against Sharon. Even her supporters seemed lukewarm, mostly older residents who valued stability over reform. Based on my informal polling, I estimated that Tom and I should each receive at least 60 to 70 votes, enough to secure board positions. Election day was December 15th, a Tuesday. The HOA office was supposed to close at 5 p.m., at which point Sharon and Karen would count the ballots. Tom and I both showed up at 4:30, along with about a dozen other concerned homeowners. Patricia was at the front desk, looking more nervous than usual. Behind her, we could see a large cardboard box, presumably containing the returned ballots. "We're here to observe the counting," Tom announced. Patricia glanced toward Sharon's office door, which was closed. Mrs. Kensington said that observers would make the process too complicated. California Corporations Code Section 7613 requires that HOA elections be conducted fairly, and that members have a right to observe the process, I said, pulling out my phone where I had the actual statute saved. "We're not leaving." The office door opened and Sharon emerged, dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her expression when she saw us could have curdled milk. "This is a closed administrative process," she said. "Then you're violating state law," Tom replied. "Either let us observe, or we'll file a complaint with the state attorney general's office before the sun sets." For a long moment, Sharon stared at us, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she smiled, and that smile scared me more than her anger had. "Fine. You may observe. But you will not speak, you will not touch anything, and you will stand in the designated observer area." She pointed to a corner of the room, about 15 feet from her desk. Karen Whitmore arrived at 5 p.m. exactly. She and Sharon carried the ballot box to a large table in the main office area. Tom, myself, and the other observers clustered in our designated corner, craning our necks to see. Sharon made a show of opening the box and dumping the envelopes onto the table. There were a lot of them, which was encouraging. High voter turnout usually meant people cared enough to participate. "We will open each envelope, verify that the ballot is valid, and sort them into piles by candidate," Sharon announced. "Karen will keep a running tally." They worked methodically, opening envelopes and examining ballots. From my position, I couldn't see the ballots clearly, but I could see Sharon and Karen's faces. And what I saw troubled me. They looked too calm, too confident, showing none of the concern I would expect if the vote was going against them. After about 45 minutes, Sharon announced that they were done with the initial count and would now tally the results. She and Karen huddled over a notepad, conferring in whispers. Finally, Sharon turned to face us, her smile triumphant. "The results are as follows: Sharon Kensington, 147 votes, Donald Mercier, 143 votes, Karen Whitmore, 139 votes, Blake Morrison, 135 votes, Donna Pritchard, 132 votes. Write-in candidate Thomas Rodriguez, 12 votes. Write-in candidate Marcus Chen, 9 votes. Several other write-in candidates received between 1 and 4 votes each. The room fell silent. That was impossible. I had talked to over 60 people who promised to vote for us. Even accounting for people lying or changing their minds, getting only 9 votes was statistically absurd. "I want to see the ballots," I said, stepping forward. "That won't be possible," Sharon replied. "The ballots are confidential. They've been counted. The election is over." As a member, I have a right to review HOA records, and those ballots are now part of the official election record. Sharon's jaw tightened. "You may submit a written request to review records, which will be considered within 30 business days as required by law." "By which time you could do anything with those ballots," Tom said. "Are you accusing me of something?" Sharon's voice was dangerous. "I'm saying the results don't match what I'm hearing from the community. Something is wrong here." Perhaps you overestimated your support, Karen said smugly. It's a common mistake among unsuccessful candidates. We left the office, defeated and angry. Outside, our small group of observers gathered in the parking lot. She cheated, Tom said flatly. I don't know how, but she cheated. Knowing it and proving it are two different things, I replied. But I couldn't let it go. That night I lay awake running scenarios through my head. How could Sharon have rigged the election? She controlled the ballots, controlled the counting, and controlled access to the results, but there had to be evidence somewhere. At 2:30 in the morning, I got out of bed as quietly as possible, trying not to wake Jennifer. I dressed in dark clothes and grabbed a flashlight. The HOA office was less than a quarter-mile from our house, an easy walk even in the middle of the night. The office was dark and locked, as expected. But the office was adjacent to the community center, and behind the building were large blue recycling bins and regular trash dumpsters. Tuesday night meant the trash wouldn't be collected until Friday morning. I felt ridiculous, standing in the cold December night, preparing to dig through garbage. But something drove me forward, some instinct that evidence existed if I just looked hard enough. The recycling bins were mostly full of paper, which made sense for an office building. I pulled out my flashlight and started carefully sorting through the contents. Junk mail, old newsletters, office papers, printer paper scraps, and then I found it. Stuffed behind one of the recycling bins, not even inside it, was a crumpled piece of cardstock. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat, my heart starting to pound. It was a ballot, identical to the one I had received in the mail. Except this one was pristine, unmarked with no envelope, no postmark, nothing indicating it had gone through the mail system. I kept searching, being more thorough now. Over the next 45 minutes, I found 7 more blank ballots, all crumpled or torn, clearly discarded. But why would there be blank ballots in the recycling? Homeowners had been sent their ballots. These shouldn't exist. Unless someone had printed extras. I carefully collected all 8 ballots, placing them in a plastic grocery bag I had brought for exactly this purpose. I took dozens of photos with my phone, documenting exactly where I found each one. Then I continued searching through both the recycling and the trash. In one of the trash dumpsters, buried under bags of regular garbage, I found a mother lode. A large manila envelope, unsealed, containing over 30 ballots. These ballots were filled out, each one marked with votes for Sharon, Donald, Karen, Blake, and Donna. Every single one. The handwriting varied, some in pen, some in pencil, some printed, some cursive. But certain patterns emerged when you looked carefully. The way certain letters were formed was too similar across supposedly different voters. My hands were shaking as I photographed everything. This was it. This was proof. Sharon had created fake ballots and stuffed the ballot box, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full scope of the fraud. I carefully repackaged everything in my plastic bag and made my way home through the dark streets, constantly looking over my shoulder, paranoid that someone would see me. Jennifer woke up when I came back inside, smelling of garbage and recycling. "Marcus, what the hell? Where were you? You're going to think I'm crazy," I said, and then told her everything. To her credit, Jennifer didn't tell me I was paranoid or overreacting. She looked at the ballots spread across our dining room table, and her expression turned grim. "We need to call a lawyer, tonight, right now. It's 3 in the morning. I don't care, this is fraud. This is criminal." We ended up waiting until 8 a.m. to call the lawyer, using those hours to document everything. I created a detailed spreadsheet cataloging each fake ballot, noting the handwriting characteristics, the marking patterns, everything. I took high-resolution photos from multiple angles. The lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Fernandez who specialized in HOA disputes, agreed to meet us that afternoon. We laid out everything in her office conference room. Rebecca examined each ballot carefully, occasionally making notes. Finally, she sat back and let out a long breath. "This is significant. If you can prove these ballots were counted in the election and that they shouldn't have been, you have grounds for legal action. but we need to act fast. California law requires that challenges to HOA elections be filed within 30 days. What's our next step? I asked. We file an emergency petition with the Superior Court, requesting an injunction to preserve all election materials, and requesting a court-ordered audit of the ballots. We'll also need to send a formal demand to the HOA board requiring them to secure all election materials immediately. They'll destroy the evidence the moment they receive that letter, Tom said. He had joined us for the meeting. That's why we file both the demand letter and the court petition simultaneously. If they destroy evidence after receiving a preservation demand, that's spoliation of evidence, which looks very bad in court and can lead to adverse inference rulings. Rebecca worked fast. By the end of the week, we had filed a detailed petition with the Riverside County Superior Court. The petition outlined the suspicious election results, provided my statistical analysis showing the improbability of such lopsided results given community sentiment, and most importantly, included photos and physical evidence of the fake ballots I had discovered. We also named Sharon Kensington, Karen Whitmore, and the HOA board as defendants, requesting that the court order a full audit of the election, supervised by an independent third party. The HOA received the petition and demand letter on December 20th, just 5 days after the election. Sharon's response was immediate and predictable. She sent an email to all homeowners claiming that certain disgruntled residents who lost the election fairly were making baseless accusations and wasting community resources on frivolous litigation. She also announced that the legal fees to defend against our lawsuit would be paid from HOA funds, meaning every homeowner would be paying for her defense. The court scheduled an emergency hearing for January 8th. In the meantime, Judge Helena Morrison issued a temporary order requiring the HOA to preserve all election materials and prohibiting the destruction or alteration of any ballots, envelopes, or related documents. During the weeks leading up to the hearing, Rebecca took depositions from Patricia, the HOA assistant, and from several homeowners who had attended the ballot count. Patricia's deposition was particularly revealing. Under oath, she admitted that Sharon had been in the office alone with the ballot box for approximately 2 hours on the afternoon of December 15th, before the official 5 p.m. counting was scheduled to begin. "Did you think that was unusual?" Rebecca asked during the deposition. "I thought it was inappropriate," Patricia replied quietly, "but Mrs. Kensington is my boss. I was told to take an extended lunch and not return until 4:45. Did you see what Mrs. Kensington was doing during that time?" "No." "But when I returned, there seemed to be more envelopes in the box than there had been that morning." Sharon's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Martin Colby, objected strenuously to this testimony as speculation. But the damage was done. The hearing on January 8th was held in a packed courtroom. Judge Morrison was a stern woman in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Rebecca presented our case methodically, walking through the statistical impossibility of the election results, the suspicious circumstances of the counting process, and most dramatically, the fake ballots I had discovered. "Your Honor, these ballots were found in the trash and recycling areas adjacent to the HOA office on the night of the election. They are printed on identical cardstock to the official ballots, but they were never mailed to homeowners. Many of them are filled out in what appears to be forged handwriting, all voting for the incumbent board members." Martin Colby stood to respond. "Your Honor, there is no proof that these ballots were actually included in the final count. Mr. Chen admittedly retrieved these from the garbage. They could be test ballots, misprinted ballots, or ballots that were intentionally discarded precisely because they were not legitimate. Then the defendants should have no objection to a full forensic audit of all ballots cast," Rebecca shot back. If these fake ballots weren't counted, an audit will prove that. If they were counted, that's election fraud. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her expression was serious. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient grounds for concern about the integrity of the December 15th election. The court orders the following. 1. All ballots, envelopes, and election materials are to be turned over to an independent forensic examiner within 48 hours. 2. The forensic examiner will conduct a complete audit, including but not limited to verification that all ballots correspond to legitimate homeowner accounts, analysis of handwriting patterns, examination of paper stock consistency, and verification of postmarks where applicable. 3. The current board members may continue serving in a limited capacity pending the results of the audit, but they may not approve any expenditures over $1,000 or make any major policy changes. 4. All parties will return to this courtroom on February 15th for a hearing on the audit results. Sharon's face went white. Colby immediately stood to object, but Judge Morrison cut him off. Mr. Colby, your clients had the opportunity to run a transparent election. They chose not to. They then chose to resist providing access to election materials. This court will not allow HOA boards to operate as authoritarian fiefdoms. The order stands. The next month was tense. The forensic examiner, a retired FBI document analyst named Dr. Richard Patterson, took possession of all election materials on January 10th. He also examined the fake ballots I had discovered, comparing them to the official ballots that had been counted. Dr. Patterson's work was meticulous. He used advanced techniques including handwriting analysis software, paper fiber analysis, and postmark authentication. He also cross-referenced every ballot against the HOA membership records to ensure that each vote came from a legitimate homeowner account. Rebecca kept us updated on the process. He's finding serious irregularities, she told us in late January. I can't share details yet, but the audit is revealing exactly what we suspected. In the meantime, life in Sunset Vista Estates was strange. Sharon continued acting as HOA president, but her power was significantly limited by the court order. She couldn't retaliate against us through fines or violations without risking contempt of court charges. The community was divided, with some people believing Sharon had been wronged and others convinced she was guilty. The tension broke on February 10th, 5 days before the scheduled hearing. Rebecca called me at work, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Marcus, you need to sit down. The audit results are in, and they're even worse than we thought." "How bad?" Dr. Patterson identified 163 fraudulent ballots that were included in the final count. All of them voted for the incumbent board members. When you remove those fake votes, the actual results show that you received 74 votes and Tom received 81 votes. You both should have been elected to the board, along with 3 other write-in candidates. Sharon and her entire slate actually lost. I couldn't breathe. 163 fake ballots. That's not a mistake, that's a systematic fraud. It gets worse. Dr. Patterson determined that all the fraudulent ballots were printed on the same printer, likely the printer in the HOA office. The handwriting analysis shows that despite attempts to disguise it, most of the fake ballots were filled out by only 3 or 4 different people. And several of the fake ballots were supposedly from homeowners who Dr. Patterson independently confirmed never received their ballots in the mail or who had actually voted by dropping their ballots off in person, meaning someone voted twice using their name. What happens now? The hearing is in 5 days. Judge Morrison is not going to be happy. And Marcus, there's something else. Based on the severity of the fraud, the court is required to refer this to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Election fraud is a felony in California. The February 15th hearing was even more crowded than the first one. News had leaked about the audit findings, and the local media had picked up the story. 2 television news crews were set up outside the courthouse. Judge Morrison entered the courtroom and everyone rose. She wasted no time in getting to the point. This court has reviewed the forensic audit report prepared by Dr. Richard Patterson. Dr. Patterson, please summarize your findings for the record. Dr. Patterson, a distinguished-looking man with white hair and wire-rimmed glasses, stood and read from his report in a clear, professional voice. He detailed every aspect of the fraud, from the fake ballots to the handwriting forgeries to the manipulation of voter records. In my 30 years of forensic document examination, including work on numerous election fraud cases, I have rarely seen fraud this systematic and this brazen, he concluded. The evidence conclusively demonstrates that the December 15th election was compromised by the insertion of at least 163 fraudulent ballots. The courtroom erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. Judge Morrison gavelled for order. The court finds, based on clear and convincing evidence, that the December 15th election was fraudulent and that the results as announced by the defendants are invalid. The court hereby orders the following remedies. First, the election results are vacated in their entirety. Second, the current board members are immediately removed from their positions, effective today. Third, a new election will be conducted within 60 days under court supervision, with independent ballot counting and verification procedures. Fourth, this matter is being referred to the Riverside County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal violations, including election fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. She turned her gaze directly to Sharon, who was sitting ramrod straight next to her attorney, her face a mask of rage and fear. Mrs. Kensington, Mr. Mercier, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Morrison, and Mrs. Pritchard, you are hereby ordered to immediately surrender all HOA files, records, accounts, passwords, keys, and property to the court-appointed interim administrator. You are prohibited from entering HOA property or interfering with HOA operations pending the completion of the criminal investigation and the new election. Do you understand? Sharon stood slowly. For a moment, I thought she might start screaming or arguing. Instead, she simply said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice so cold it could have frozen helium. The hearing concluded with Judge Morrison appointing a professional HOA management company to run Sunset Vista Estates on an interim basis until the new election could be held. As we filed out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed us. "Mr. Chen, how do you feel about the court's ruling?" "I feel vindicated, but also sad that it came to this. All we wanted was fair representation and for the rules to apply equally to everyone. Will you be running in the new election?" "Yes, I will." Sharon and her board members left through a side entrance, surrounded by security to protect them from angry homeowners who had gathered outside. I caught a glimpse of Sharon's face as she climbed into her Mercedes. She looked 10 years older than she had 2 months ago. The district attorney's investigation moved quickly. In early March, investigators executed search warrants on Sharon's home and the HOA office, seizing computers, printers, and documents. They also interviewed dozens of homeowners and conducted a parallel forensic analysis of the ballots. The new election was scheduled for March 20th. This time, the process was completely transparent. Ballots were printed on special secure paper with unique serial numbers. They were mailed through a third-party election services company. The ballot box was secured with tamper-evident seals. And on Election Day, the counting took place in the community center with full observation access for all homeowners. Tom and I both ran again, along with several other community members who wanted to reform the HOA. Our platform was simple: transparency, fairness, and common sense enforcement of the rules. The election results were announced at 8 p.m. on March 20th. Tom received 123 votes. I received 117 votes. A woman named Sarah Chen, no relation to me, received 109 votes. Two other reform candidates, Miguel Santos and Raj Patel, received 98 and 94 votes respectively. We had swept all 5 board positions. Sharon received 14 votes. The victory party at Tom's house that night was joyous but also somber. We had won, but the community had been through trauma. Neighbors had turned on neighbors. Trust had been shattered. Rebuilding would take time. On April 3rd, the Riverside County District Attorney announced criminal charges. Sharon Kensington was charged with 11 felony counts, including election fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. Yes, embezzlement. During their investigation, prosecutors discovered that Sharon had been funneling HOA funds into personal accounts for over 3 years, stealing an estimated $140,000. Karen Whitmore and Donald Mercier were also charged with conspiracy and election fraud for their roles in the ballot stuffing scheme. Blake Morrison received immunity in exchange for cooperating with prosecutors, providing testimony that Sharon had recruited him and the others to help fill out fake ballots. Donna Pritchard was not charged, with prosecutors determining she had been unaware of the fraud and genuinely believed she had been elected fairly. The criminal case moved through the system over the following months. Sharon attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but the district attorney's office was unwilling to offer anything less than significant prison time given the severity and premeditation of her crimes. The trial began in September and lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Patterson testified about the fake ballots. Patricia, the former HOA assistant, testified about Sharon's suspicious behavior on Election Day. Blake Morrison, granted immunity, testified that Sharon had explicitly instructed him to help create fake ballots and had assured him they would never be caught. The moment that broke Sharon's defense came when prosecutors played a voicemail she had left for Donald Mercier 2 days before the election. In it, she said, "Don't worry about the vote count. I've got it handled. Those troublemakers won't know what hit them." On October 7th, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Sharon showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, staring straight ahead with the same cold expression she had worn in court months earlier. Sentencing came in November. Judge Thomas Brennan, who presided over the criminal trial, was not lenient. "Mrs. Kensington, you were entrusted with a position of leadership in your community. Instead of serving your neighbors, you betrayed them. You stole their votes, their money, and their trust." This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated, sustained criminal enterprise. The damage you've caused extends beyond financial loss to the very fabric of community trust and democratic participation. He sentenced Sharon to 6 years in state prison, along with restitution of the embezzled funds plus penalties. Karen Whitmore received 4 years. Donald Mercier received 3 years. By the time sentencing happened, our new HOA board had been governing Sunset Vista Estates for 8 months. We had immediately implemented reforms. Transparent budgets posted online, monthly town halls with open queue and accessions, a simplified violation process with clear appeal rights, and reasonable enforcement focused on genuine community concerns rather than petty power trips. We also hired Patricia as our new HOA manager, giving her a raise and the authority to make common-sense decisions without board micromanagement. She had been a victim of Sharon's abuse, just like the rest of us. The special assessment for the parking lot resurfacing was canceled. We obtained multiple competitive bids and ended up doing the work for $85,000 instead of the $360,000 Sharon had proposed. The savings allowed us to actually reduce HOA dues for the first time in 5 years. Mrs. Hoffman, the elderly widow who had been fined for a FedEx package on her porch, became one of our biggest supporters. We refunded every penny of the unjust fines Sharon had levied, totaling over $40,000 returned to homeowners. The media attention around our case was significant. We were interviewed by local news, state news, and even a national cable news program did a segment on HOA abuse and reform. Other communities across California reached out, asking for advice on fighting their own corrupt boards. Tom and I, along with Rebecca Fernandez, ended up writing a guide for homeowners on how to challenge HOA election fraud, which we posted online for free. The guide covered everything from documenting irregularities to preserving evidence to navigating the court system. On a cold evening in December, almost exactly 1 year after I found those fake ballots in the recycling bin, I stood in my driveway taking down our Christmas lights. It was past 4 p.m., well past Sharon's arbitrary deadline, and my trash cans were visible from the street. No violation notice would be coming. Jennifer came out with hot chocolate, and we stood together looking at our home, our community, our neighborhood that finally felt peaceful. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. "All the stress, the legal fees, the late nights." I thought about it seriously. The fight had cost us thousands in legal fees, even though we had won and recovered some costs. It had consumed months of our lives. I had lost sleep, lost weight, and probably taken years off my life from stress. "No," I said finally. "Some things are worth fighting for." Democracy isn't just about national elections and presidents and senators. It's about every level of civic participation, even something as mundane as an HOA. When people abuse power, when they steal elections and silence dissent, someone has to stand up and say no. I'm just glad we could prove what happened. Emma, our daughter, ran out to join us, chattering about her day at school. She had been too young to fully understand what had happened, but she knew that her dad and Tom had done something important, something that made the neighborhood better. The community center lights were on in the distance. A new family had just moved in, attracted by our community's reputation for good governance and transparency. The real estate agents had actually started using our HOA reforms as a selling point. Property values had increased 15% over the past year, vindicating our argument that good governance and community trust were more valuable than Sharon's iron-fisted rule. I thought about Sharon sometimes, sitting in a prison cell, her life destroyed by her own corruption and arrogance. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I felt no sympathy either. She had made her choices, had decided that power and control were more important than integrity and service. The following spring, Tom decided not to run for re-election to the board. His business was demanding more of his time, and he felt good about what we had accomplished. I ran again and was re-elected, along with 4 other solid community members who shared our vision of transparent, fair governance. At our first board meeting of the new term, we voted to commission a plaque for the community center commemorating what had happened. The plaque's inscription read, "In recognition of the homeowners who stood up for truth, transparency, and democratic principles." When election fraud threatened our community, citizens demanded justice and accountability. May this serve as a reminder that vigilance and integrity must always guard against the abuse of power. March 2026. Some people thought the plaque was too political, too controversial. But the majority of homeowners supported it. What had happened in our community was important, a cautionary tale about what happens when people with authority believe they are above the law. Rebecca Fernandez attended the plaque dedication ceremony. She had become a friend during the legal battle, and her expertise had been crucial to our victory. "You know what the best part of this case was?" she said during her speech at the dedication. "It proved that the system works when people are willing to fight for it. The courts, the law, the democratic process, they're only as strong as the citizens who demand they be upheld." Marcus, Tom, and everyone who stood with them could have just accepted the fraudulent results. They could have moved or stayed quiet or convinced themselves it wasn't worth the trouble. Instead, they demanded justice. They gathered evidence, followed the legal process, and trusted that truth would prevail. And it did. The local news covered the dedication. That evening, I received emails from people across the country who were fighting their own battles against corrupt HOAs, homeowner associations that had become petty tyrannies rather than community organizations. To each person, I sent the same message. Document everything, find allies, don't be afraid to seek legal help, and never give up. Justice might move slowly, but it does move. Patricia, who had transformed from a nervous assistant into a confident HOA manager, pulled me aside after the ceremony. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I knew something was wrong with that election. I saw Sharon doing things that didn't make sense, but I was too scared to speak up. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of Sharon's retaliation. I regret not saying something sooner." "You helped in the end," I told her. "Your deposition testimony was crucial. I should have been braver from the start. Most people aren't brave until they have to be. What matters is that when it counted, you told the truth." That summer, we held the first annual Sunset Vista Estates Community Day, a celebration we had never had under Sharon's rule. There were bouncy houses for kids, a barbecue, live music, and a dunk tank where board members volunteered to be targets. When it was my turn in the dunk tank, Emma threw the ball with perfect accuracy, sending me plunging into the water to the cheers of neighbors who had become genuine friends. As I climbed out, soaking wet and laughing, I looked around at the community we had saved. Children were playing, families were gathering. People were connecting with their neighbors in ways that Sharon's climate of fear had prevented. This was what an HOA was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community and improve their quality of life. Not an authoritarian regime enforcing arbitrary rules and enriching corrupt leaders. In August, we received word that Sharon's appeal had been denied. She would serve her full sentence, minus time for good behavior. Karen and Donald were already in prison, quietly serving their terms. The embezzled money had been mostly recovered through seizure of assets, and those funds were being used for actual community improvements. On a warm evening in September, almost 2 years after this whole ordeal began, I sat on my front porch with Jennifer, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. A neighbor walked by walking their dog and waved. Another neighbor's kid rode past on a bicycle, calling out a friendly greeting. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gone looking through that trash?" Jennifer asked. I had thought about it many times. If I hadn't found those fake ballots, Sharon would have continued ruling the HOA like her personal kingdom. The embezzlement would have continued. More homeowners would have been targeted, fined, and driven out. The community would have remained divided and fearful. "Someone would have stopped her eventually," I said. "Maybe not with the election, but something would have brought her down. Corrupt people always overreach eventually." "Maybe, but it was you who actually did it. You could have just accepted the loss and moved on with your life." "That's not who I am. That's not who I want Emma to see me as. When something is wrong, you don't just accept it, you fight to make it right." Jennifer leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of us. We went through hell, but we came out better for it." The community had indeed come out better. Our HOA was now regularly cited as a model for good governance. Other communities adopted our transparency measures. Rebecca Fernandez had built a thriving practice helping homeowners fight corrupt HOAs, using our case as a template, and me. I was just a guy who lived in a nice neighborhood, served on the HOA board, and tried to be a good neighbor. The fight against Sharon had been necessary, but I was glad it was over. I was glad to return to normal life, to focus on my family and my work and the small pleasures of community living. But I also knew that vigilance was forever. Power would always attract people who wanted to abuse it. HOA, local governments, school boards, any organization with authority over people's lives could become corrupt if citizens weren't paying attention. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, why did that lady try to cheat in the election?" I thought carefully about how to answer. Some people think rules don't apply to them. They think they're smarter than everyone else and they can get away with doing wrong things. But eventually, the truth always comes out. That's why it's important to always do the right thing, even when it's hard. Did you do the right thing? I tried to. I stood up for what was fair, even though it was scary and difficult. That's all any of us can do. She hugged me tight. I'm glad you did. As I left her room and turned off the light, I reflected on how much had changed in 2 years. From that first ridiculous violation notice about trash cans to a criminal trial and prison sentences. From a community divided by fear to one united by shared values. From helplessness to empowerment, the fight had been worth it. Every sleepless night, every dollar spent on legal fees, every moment of stress and worry. Because in the end, we had proven something important, that ordinary citizens could stand up to corruption and win. That elections mattered, even in something as seemingly trivial as an HOA. That democracy required participation and vigilance at every level. I walked back to the porch where Jennifer was still sitting, and we watched the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow, I would go to work, come home, maybe mow the lawn, definitely spend time with Emma. Normal life, peaceful life, the kind of life that's only possible when you're not constantly fighting against injustice. But I also knew that if something like this ever happened again, if corruption or fraud threatened my community, I would fight just as hard. Because that's what citizenship means. That's what being part of a community means. Not just enjoying the benefits, but being willing to defend the principles that make those benefits possible. The street lights came on, one by one, illuminating our neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids laughing, dogs barking, the normal sounds of a peaceful evening in a well-run community. This was what we had fought for. This was what we had won, and it was worth every moment of the struggle.